Hey guys, so I know a lot of people have been asking for a studio tour, so I figured I'd do that in this video, as well as kind of talk about my relationship with gear, how it's changed over the years, and maybe some suggestions and my general thought process behind each piece of gear that I own. Right now I do own a lot of gear, but I think in general I only use a few things every day that are like my foundation for recording and for playing guitar. So I guess we could just talk about my main signal chain first, and then why I chose each piece, and then we can go more into my opinions on buying gear and, you know, having some people have an addiction. So guitar wise, I've found that having one or two great playing guitars is way more beneficial and like inspiring than owning a bunch of lower cost, not necessarily lower cost, but just not great guitars. So my main guitars right now are the iconic vintage modern Strat, which was my first guitar endorsement, and it's the best Strat I've ever played. It's amazing. I use it every day on like everything. The Abasi Larada Legion, which is amazing, and I use it for all the stuff where it makes sense to use an 8-string and to use that style of modern guitar. And recently I've been using the Strandberg Plini neck-through model, which has been great for doing the floating trem, more fusion thing that like Plini's so great at, and you know, doing that whole thing. So these are kind of my main instruments, and they all serve very different recording and playing purposes, right? None of these guitars have too much overlap with them. I'd say the ones that have the biggest overlap are probably the Plini model and my iconic, but at the same time they're still very different guitars, because the Plini model doesn't really do Strat style stuff, and the Strat model, well, the way I have it set up, it's not a floating trem. It's the trem is all the way against the body, which works well for how I want that Strat to be. So for the Strat, I use it a lot for chord stuff, for like more that vintage sounding, you know, Fender clean kind of edge of breakup chord and lead tones. I feel like a Strat really blends well in a mix with single coils, and then using the humbucker more for the darker sounding leads and more. So in the Strat I have two Lollar Blackface single coils and then a Lollar Imperial humbucker, and they're all kind of vintage voiced. So the humbucker gives me that low output but still heavier than a single coil, still more output than a single coil, and to get like that more bluesy vintage kind of guitar lead tone thing. And I use the Abasi for pretty much all modern sounding rhythm and leads, and of course all the thumping and 8-string stuff. And then the Plini model I use for if I want the floating trem thing, or if I want the 2 humbuckers together sound, because I can't get that with the Strat. You can get that with the Abasi, but the pickups are active, so it's still a little bit of a different thing. On the Plini signature model, it's passive pickups, and I believe they're Plini's signature pickups. So those are my 3 right now, my main guitars that I'm using, and they all serve different purposes. And so I'm not constantly looking for, oh, what's a new guitar? Because these guitars work really well for me. I'm not constantly trying to find the next guitar that maybe could improve my playing or anything like that. The next fundamental part of like recording gear that I have is the modeler. So I'm using an Axe-Fx FM3. Now I kind of went with the FM3 instead of the Axe-Fx because I wanted something that was more portable for if I want to go to, I mean of course this is before the lockdown stuff, but this is if I wanted to go to a friend's house and record some parts and have the exact tones that I was messing with at home, or if I want to play somewhere that has a whole, like an audio engineer and some kind of monitoring system, then I can use the Axe-Fx to get, again, the exact tones that I was recording with or using at home. I used to do the real amp with a mic thing, which I just don't want to do anymore. I think it worked well at the time, but it's just so hard to recreate, at least for me, someone who's kind of inexperienced with using mics and stuff. I was having a really hard time getting consistent guitar tones or getting tones that were better than modelers. I really couldn't. So now that I've been using a modeler for about maybe 2 years, I found that my tones, I think at least, have gotten much better, and they're consistent, and I can get them, I can change small things, and if I use the same IR in different amp tones, I know it's gonna still have some kind of characteristics that stay the same, so it makes a mix a lot more cohesive. I've also found that just the workflow is way easier. I can just load up a preset that I made, record a song, and then that's it. I don't have to set up a mic, mess with pedals, and then buy preamps for the mics and like get into that whole world of hardware, like for like studio hardware. And then also you get these amazing reverbs and like stereo delays and all this different types of atmospheric stuff that I maybe couldn't get with an amp unless I bought a ton of pedals and stuff like that. The other huge reason that I chose to go with a modeler is that I still was looking for my sound kind of thing, and I didn't want to have to buy like 20 amps to find which amp worked the best for me, right? So using a modeler made sense because then I can just go through the list of however many amps they have. I mean, it's a ton. I couldn't say the exact number, and find amps that I would normally have never tried because they cost like $5,000 or something, to find the one that fit my playing style the best, which is exactly what happened. So recently I've been using a ton of Friedman models and like the 5150 and the Bogner Ecstasy and the PRS, some PRS amps, and I've been able to find a sound that I love where I would have had to spend a ton of money on gear otherwise to find those same tones. So I think if you're still searching for your sound and you don't want to spend a ton of money on a bunch of different amps and a bunch of different pedals and a bunch of different cabs, a modeler is really a great option. So the next thing in my signal chain for recording is an interface. I've been tempted to go with a pricier one every now and then, but 99% of the time, I really don't need it. Especially since I'm using an Axe-Fx, I'm using the SPDIF out of the Axe-Fx into my my Focusrite 18i8 interface. and like it sounds great, and I really don't need any of the processing that maybe you could get with the universal audio interface. And then speaker wise, I'm using Yamaha HS8s, which are great. So it's all kind of like subjective where you think this stuff is expensive or not, because relative to really high-end speakers, these are pretty affordable. So the other thing with gear that I think is kind of important to talk about, even though it's been said a million times, is that most of the time buying new gear will not make you a better player, no matter how much you think it will. Right? I know people who spend more time looking at gear for what will make them sound the best instead of practicing.
There's definitely an amount of like needing to have your bases covered, right? Like I need to be able to do these sounds in order to like do what I need to do every day, whether it's in a gigging situation or in a recording situation. Like I need to have these sounds available to me. And once you get past that, you're able to tell yourself, okay, I don't need this gear. I can work without it, right? Like when I got the Fractal, I stopped buying amps, right? Until recently, because I bought a new amp.
The other thing is that if you're waiting till you get that right piece of gear to start recording, when you do get that piece of gear, you're going to have no experience recording, and you're going to be starting from scratch. It makes sense to wait till you have the gear that you want to start playing and to start practicing, right? So even if you don't have the best gear right now, you should still be playing as much as possible and recording as much as possible and trying to improve yourself. You know, you can do that at the same time as trying to get new gear, but you shouldn't put gear in front of playing. Of course, this depends on what your goals are, but I think this is more towards younger people who are falling into the YouTube rabbit hole of gear and feel that, oh, they don't sound like that other person because they don't have the same gear. When it's, you know, I can sound like me on almost anything, and if I'm a bad player, I'm gonna sound bad on almost anything. So it's really more important to focus on to get that experience of playing guitar, of recording, of playing with other people, of, you know, doing everything that a musician should do before you get that nice piece of gear. Because even if you do get the nice piece of gear, who cares?
Because the question you start asking yourself is, how do I justify this purchase? Right? Because if I buy something and that makes it so that I don't use something that I've had for a while, after 6 months, you gotta ask yourself, like, okay, like, I need to sell that. All the sounds that I've been recording for the past 3, 4, 5 months has been with that Friedman head into my torpedo, into some pedals. But it's also like this setup is also helping me because it's helping me have more of a minimalist approach to the way I make guitar sounds, right? Like I'll like get a really good source tone and track it kind of dry and then do stuff in post, right? There's not that many options. Like I get the cab IR right, and then I get the gain stage right, and the amp is the type of response that I look for.
I think the one place where gear can help you with being a better player is the guitar itself. I find that it's important to have at least one nice playing guitar. One where the action's set up correctly and like you don't feel like you're fighting the guitar to play what you want to play. You're using your guitar as a tool to convey whatever is in your head to the listener. So it makes sense to have one that fits your playing and where you don't feel the disconnect between yourself and the guitar. You want the guitar to feel as an extension of yourself, right? And if you're playing the wrong guitar, then it could be hard to do that. So I've found that, you know, having a guitar where it has the right kind of pickups and it has a great setup really helps me with that kind of playing and that kind of connection to the instrument. The other piece of gear I wanted to talk about was your DAW. So a DAW is pretty much whatever software you're using to record yourself. I made the switch, I guess, a year ago now. I went from Pro Tools to Logic. Both are honestly great. I think they both excel at different things. I ended up going with Logic because I liked the stock plugins more. Logic to me felt like a more creative DAW. So I found that the synth sounds and a lot of the just the way that Logic was laid out inspired me more than Pro Tools. Pro Tools felt very bland and kind of utilitarian, when Logic feels more creative and like inspiring. As far as plugins go, I really only ever bought a couple. Most of the plugins that I use are stock Logic plugins, which they're great. Honestly, I would be completely fine only using stock Logic plugins. They're all really well made and have pretty much, they compete with any other plugin that you can buy. I guess the last piece of gear that I wanted to talk about was camera equipment. I use a Fuji XT-3 camera body, and then I have a few different lenses that I use alongside with it. My main lens for this kind of stuff and more the wide angle stuff is my Fuji 35mm 1.4. It's a great lens. The autofocus is really loud, so I pretty much can't use autofocus if I'm doing any kind of talking stuff, if I'm using a mic. But other than that, it's a great lens, really sharp. But the ones that I've been really having a lot of fun with are these vintage lenses. So this is the Canon FD 50mm 1.4. They're really cheap and they're amazing. So they're all manual focus, but if you've never tried a manual focus only lens, they're pretty great. So like the manual focus on the Fuji is like a focus by wire system. So there's like a motor inside of the lens where when I twist the outside of the lens, there's a motor telling the lens to move and to shift the focus. But with these lenses, it's all, there's no electronic parts in it. So the manual focus feels amazing. There's like resistance. It's actual moving parts in the lens that are all connected to each other. It's not like an electronic system. So you can get these really nice, smooth focus pulls. I really don't know too much about camera stuff, but I found that these vintage lenses are like a really cheap way to get some really amazing footage. All the gear shots from the beginning and throughout the video were all shot on this 50mm. The other one I got recently is this guy. So this is another Canon FD lens, but this is the 135mm 3.5. So I just kind of wanted more of like a zoomed in lens to get more like telephoto shots and stuff like that. Lights, I have these cheap newer lights. This is the newer NL 660. Yeah, they're cheap lights. They're bicolor, so you can kind of adjust the color temperature on them to whatever you want. I have two of them. They come in packs of 2. And so this one I'll usually use as like a backlight or like a hair light, and then I'll have another one which I have right here as my key light. They do have like this diffusion panel, but it really doesn't do that much, so you really have to figure out a way to diffuse these. I use a diffusion sheet. So if you look right here, I have this diffusion sheet, which it's almost like the same material as like a shower curtain. So these diffuse the light like crazy, which lets you get this like really soft, kind of more like cinematic light, right? I think it's completely possible to have a great rig and great recording setup with just very few high quality things. For me, it's just guitar, modeler, interface, computer. So it's just 4 things. Anyways, I hope that was somewhat insightful into my thought process behind gear and how my thoughts with gear have changed over the years. And then also just whatever gear I'm using in the studio, So have fun gear hunting. Try not to get stuck in the gas gear acquisition syndrome. You really don't need that much gear. Buying that next popular overdrive really isn't going to do much for you, especially ones that are like clones of other. Like, you don't need the newest Tube Screamer. They all sound relatively the same. Even the TS10 compared to like the TS9. Everyone wants the TS10. I'm sure it sounds great, but it doesn't sound that different from just the cheaper TS9 or whatever the main Tube Screamer is. I don't know. I wouldn't think about it too much. Just get what you like. And yeah, I don't know. Peace out, guys.